refocusing of institutions' missions will become much more the order of the day in the future, emphasising what an institution does well and in what it can succeed financially, and those two aren't always exactly the same. We'll surely see increasing specialisation in modes of activity. Institutions in different forms of research activity, or effectively in no research activity. In engagement with business through consultancy, or engagement with business through the exploitation of intellectual property. Different engagements with the student market, different engagements with a variety of modes of access to learning, different geographical foci for an institution's activities. All of those issues, which I think have been developing slowly over time, will become much more acute in the future as institutions specialise far more. The question here is whether this can emerge, that specialisation can emerge by institutions each individually seeking their own best self-interest. There will be fewer levers for government or for HEFGI to use to shape the sector in the future, which is one reason, I believe, that this massive withdrawal of government funding, direct funding for teaching, is not going to last indefinitely. I don't think we'll get a return to block grants, but I think we will get teaching funding returning, not least because that is one of the levers governments can use to shape what they want universities to actually do. I think in some areas, obviously research, government still has considerable levers to influence what universities do. One example that I want to raise within the issue of the role of government and the role of funders in shaping how universities specialise is just this one. Can we accept that the number of research active staff should be a function of undergraduate demand for subjects? That actually is what happened between 2001 and 2008, with quite significant consequences for the way research was funded across institutions. The student number growth drove the growth in number of researchers, and that had profound effects on the 2008 REE outcome. But overall, it will be the response of autonomous HEIs to the options that they identify for themselves that will most shape the future, as their business models specialise and diversify. We'll see universities finding new ways of using their assets, building hotels, sports facilities, performance venues, residential property, whatever seemed appropriate for them in their situation with their assets in their location. We'll see far greater diversity of mission and hence of business model. But all of this will require more risk-taking at a time when the financial context in which institutions are operating are more wary of risk. That will need to be managed, and particularly governors will need to be kept on board for just that process of risk-taking. I think that new forms of partnership and new forms of competition will be key features of the future. Partnerships between universities, between HEIs, is one way forward. The federal framework of the University of London, whose federal headquarters we are today, probably can't be replicated because it's grown out of 175 years of history. But partnerships will grow between HEIs for efficiency and for complementarity. We know that collaborations have major opportunity and transaction costs. Nonetheless, where complementary specialisation allows new academic provision that no institution can provide on its own, that needs to be seriously considered. And that also includes collaboration to protect existing provision, get away from decisions about closures being made in each institution entirely on its own. But actually it's obviously shared support services that seem less problematic and seem the most potentially productive for collaborations between institutions, especially where physical proximity to clients is not essential. VAT gets in the way, as we know, and I doubt how quickly that will be resolved in spite of the degree of optimism there is at the moment. I'm not sure how easily new models will get around the VAT problem. The University of London is now on a major project to expand still further its shared services. How easily can other universities, without the habit of working together, do that is a question. But partnerships between autonomous institutions are one thing. Strategic alliances and their mergers are far more difficult, as we know. Not least because those are often seen as associated with the failure of one of the institutions. Not all institutions will be able to achieve sustainability in the new environment. That seems certain. Will the Funding Council and government choose to be less reactive than in the past? And should they be less reactive? Should they be less purely reactive? The sector will reconfigure significantly over the next decade? Should it be done only by the market? Something, which I've already said, rarely exists outside the idealizations of policy and of speeches. Or should it be handled more strategically? Doing that may be an essential part of the greater diversification of the sector, not least if we're going to avoid one of the huge dangers of the current conjuncture. And that is, if universities are told that they must sink or swim on the basis of their own income, then they will think only of their own income. The public good functions of universities won't be abandoned, but they will reduce significantly as institutions scrutinise each to identify the value of keeping in those public good activities. I'm not hostile to having financial drivers at work, but I do wonder whether they are going to produce on their own the HE landscape that we will want in the future. The models of merger will certainly have to change. Key providers of professional services to the sector are rapidly developing alternatives. Some of them may well be in the room at the moment. We'll certainly see more complex patterns of ownership and partnerships across the sector, in a sector that's traditionally been very conservative over its own business structures. There'll be new relationships between universities and a range of external partners, for-profit providers, FE colleges, academy schools, health trusts, professional accrediting bodies, property companies, commercial services, and so on. That may require forms of legal and company structure of a new kind for the sector. New models are emerging, but I think we need to be careful about them. New models could be the source of business and mission vulnerability as much as of success. There's been much debate about commercial providers, for-profit providers, as new forms of competition in this new environment. In my view, international competition will in the longer term be more important than for-profit competition. Student numbers in higher education worldwide will continue to grow, as will those who move internationally for their education, especially at postgraduate level, I think. Between 2000 and 2007, the number of students moving internationally for higher education rose from 1.9 million to 3 million worldwide. The UK's share of that market virtually stood still at 11.6%. I doubt that its share will hold up in the future. There will be growth in competing institutions, obviously, especially those teaching in the English language. Competition in global markets will become even stronger, as will their ability to attract from the UK the best UK students to study elsewhere in the world, which is something that is going to begin soon, and we do not know on what scale it will happen. Global institutions able to offer students mobility might actually benefit very much from this new environment. And something that occurred to me as I was preparing the speech is that as we struggle to understand the strange fee differences that are emerging within the UK across the different nations, we might see that as an opportunity to explore how international competition in pricing might work. Nonetheless, how should the public, even if I think international competition is the more important, how should the public sector address competition from for-profit providers? In reality, the growth is probably uncontainable. International trade agreements, the availability of online learning, the rise of global commercial providers all mean that whatever government wants, we were going to see a rise, an increase in for-profit providers in the UK. The issues remain difficult for government over regulation and quality, issues being reflected on in HEFPI, UUK and other fora. For commercial providers, there's the call for a level playing field, and the government offers plans for different kinds of level playing field depending on the forms of access to public funding for students and institutions. But, as I've said before, the playing field slopes the other way as well. UK universities have public good role that is fundamental to the benefits they bring to society and the economy. They discharge that public good role in many different ways. They teach subjects that are unprofitable but important. They widen participation. They do research in areas that are important but not profitable. They do business engagement, out of which few universities ever make any money at all. They have a significant role in their local communities and much more. Any expansion of provision to new kinds of providers must recognise that and ensure that competitive playing field is indeed level, and that will include financial accountability as well. That will allow public universities to continue to respond to their wider responsibilities. That's part of what motivates all of us in universities today, that the demotivating force of financial imperatives and competition might prevail over that. The mistake, I think, is to see for-profit providers as pitted against public universities. Universities are used to a competitive environment. In any case, commercial providers have worked with universities for many years. The UUK report in 2010 showed the rich complexity of existing relationships. Commercial providers work with universities on recruitment routes and pathways, supply of language and study skills, accreditation, joint CPD programs, curriculum development, online learning, and a great deal more. There is a changing world out there for sure, but it isn't as new as people suggest. Universities have been increasingly working with the specialist skills of commercial organisations. And in the new world of HE, my own view is that's the most secure way for the for-profit sector to engage. The most secure way is to work with existing universities, much less risky in setting up new ones. In reality, though, I think we've been obsessing too much about immediate policy drivers, to return to the original theme that I started with. Yes, we must seek to minimise the damage of existing policy drivers. Yes, we must argue with government that short-term policy at the moment seems to be undermining its own objectives. But let's return to where I began, the long-term changes going on in higher education and the long-term continuities. The knowledge economy will need increasing numbers of people with higher learning and skills, but they will obtain them in increasingly diverse ways. The traditional 3-year degree programme in residential universities will certainly continue. Sorry, Malcolm, I'm not starting yet. It went up on the slide. The traditional 3-year degree programme in residential universities will continue, but the real growth, I think, will happen elsewhere, in part-time provision at local universities, work-based learning, distance learning, with far more flexibility of movement in and out of learning, accumulating credits, and so on. And the changing work needs will produce a dynamic engagement with higher education. Business models for universities in the future will have to position themselves in that landscape. And if mass higher education is too costly to be delivered in traditional ways, and change has been going on for a long time in that respect, then we must ensure that new modes of delivery are fit for purpose, not just cheaper. Would a 2-year degree really produce flexible, educated graduates able to learn, or merely someone with short-term skills? A consequence of all of this is that the framework and boundaries of higher education will, in my view, break. It'll become difficult to talk about a higher education sector. There will remain a core of comprehensive, core, residential, mostly research-based universities. But for the rest, new markets and new business models will make them very different from how many of them are now. Higher education as a life course stage will narrow to just one part of the population who benefit from higher education, with the rest obtaining advanced learning in different ways. In that context, I have 2 real worries. The first, how do we preserve the distinctiveness of the UK graduate? The graduate not just with skills, but with ability to think, to challenge, to be flexible in the future. We have experience of doing that outside traditional modes of residential universities, but we need to learn from those experiences and adapt them. Secondly, how do we stop that life course experience becoming socially restricted? Differences in the future may not be between those who get higher education and those who don't, but between those who do so at a comprehensive traditional university and those who access it through a myriad of providers in smaller learning modules. Both approaches will be valuable, but in a new world of higher education, a social divide might open up, with groups from privileged backgrounds getting one form of higher education, and those from less advantaged backgrounds getting the other. My dystopian vision is of a future with more widening participation, but much less social mobility. Have I mentioned fees in my talk? No. Have I mentioned student number controls, quorum margin, technical consultation on regulation? No. They didn't seem immediately relevant. What I've talked about is the longer-term changes that have long been underway, and to which the current conjuncture simply gives a specific focus. Emerging models of higher education provision are critical in all of that. But disruptive times can be at their most disruptive when they make us obsessed with the very immediate present. If universities don't think about the longer term, then no one else will. Thank you.